Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on NLBP TV. We are doing a member spotlight today with Wendy Rosen. Wendy is one of our charter members at NLBP. She is an education consultant and author. We're going to discuss her background and her book, The Hidden Link Between Vision and Learning: Why Millions of Learning Disabled Children Are Misdiagnosed. Thank you, Wendy, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Camille, for this opportunity. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. You had told me about this book back in 2016, really when we started this community. I remember
That's right.
meeting for coffee and you telling me about this book, and I am excited to see it on the shelves and doing so great. So tell me a little bit about let's start with what the book on a very high level is about, and then we'll talk about how you got involved, you know, as a parent and some of your background. Does that work for you?
That works just great.
Okay, just so people know what we're talking about in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is a subject that few people know about, so
Yeah.
Great place to start. So this book is about a category of learning disabilities that few people know about. They're called vision-related learning problems, and these are learning problems that children struggle with that are based in a functional vision problem.
Okay.
And so it brings to light this whole subject, which is missing really from our common pool of knowledge about child development, both these learning problems themselves, but also what vision actually is. We're not a vision literate society. We don't really even understand what vision is. So for instance, we typically think eyesight and vision are the same thing, and they're really not. Eyesight is the physiological ability to bring in information through our eyes, but vision is the ability to understand what that knowledge is. And vision actually happens in the brain. Vision actually happens in the whole body. And this is something we're just not generally aware of. And learning standards, the Common Core, they're all being designed without this knowledge, and so they're not developmentally appropriate for children because they're expecting children to be able to function in certain ways that they're not designed to biologically. We are not honoring this inborn developmental blueprint. So the book brings this to light and talks about what happens when there's a breakdown in the visual system and how that can affect a child's learning, development, and behavior, and even quality of life.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So what began your journey, your involvement that started you down this journey?
That is a great question, and it's where I like to begin because it was the beginning for me.
Okay.
But I think that it will resonate with a lot of people because I learned about this as a parent. And so I had been teaching elementary school for many years, and I left to start my family. When my daughter was in second grade, she began to struggle in school. And this was surprising to us because she always loved school. She taught herself to read. She taught herself to write. She used to play school. And definitely had teacher blood from early on. She's now a teacher herself.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good ending.
I know. Fast forwarded. Little spoiler alert, but
Spoiler alert, but go ahead.
But all good.
Okay.
But in second grade, she was really struggling, and we were starting to see her very stressed, and she was falling behind in her work. And we did a lot of behavior mod stuff along with her teacher to try to get her to do what she was supposed to do, and all of that. And with that, we plotted through the year, but she wasn't herself, and we were still questioning what was going on. In third grade, it got worse, and she just hit a wall and was so stressed and couldn't function and couldn't do her homework and was miserable. And she was always a happy little girl. And I knew, being a teacher, or rather being her mom, I could not be objective, even though I was a teacher, to figure out what might be going on.
Okay.
So we went through the child study team evaluation process, and we learned that she was in third grade by this point. I mentioned that.
Yep.
And we had seen, by the way, I just want to mention, her handwriting regress. It was better in kindergarten than it was in second grade. like, that's not how it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
So all this happened. And so we learned that she was actually 2 grade levels below in her writing, both written expression and in her handwriting. So as a 3rd grader, she was functioning as a 1st grader. That alone, she became classified. And we did not really have, other than that, any explanation as to why this was happening. And when I asked the child study team, they really couldn't give me an answer. And they said, well, she might be ADHD, you know, that's a medical diagnosis, go to your pediatrician. And I'm thinking, no, that's not right, but that's all we had.
Right.
So we followed up privately with another psychologist just to get a second opinion. And so I brought her these results, and my husband and I met with her, and she immediately saw a connection between her scores and the results of the evaluations. So in other words, Sarah had scored average to high average in all areas, IQ, etc., except one. She bombed on one particular assessment that required her to repeat a pattern of symbols. And she couldn't do that. And so the psychologist connected the dots and plugged this into a formula to check for potential vision problem. And she said, you know, I think this might be a vision problem based on these results. And we said, well, we thought maybe we'd get her eyes checked. I mean, we took her for regular eye checkups, but we thought maybe she needed an additional exam, because she was complaining of headaches. She'd come up with headaches. And so we thought, you know, maybe there was something visual going on. She did not at this point need or wear glasses. And she said, well, I'm going to send you to somebody called a developmental optometrist. And I said, what's a developmental optometrist? And she explained that this was a subspecialty of optometry. And these doctors have had postdoc special training to assess for, diagnose, and treat visual and perceptual problems that children have. Okay, so off we went, and on our first visit, we learned that Sarah was seeing double, and nobody knew. And I still can't talk about this without feeling emotional and getting chills, no matter how many times I tell the story. She had a visual deficit called convergence insufficiency. And in normal binocular vision, our eyes are supposed to come together and focus on one place.
Right. And
one image to the brain. With convergence insufficiency, the eyes are not able to team together and do that. And consequently, 2 images are being sent to the brain. The brain is seeing double. And that causes a myriad of problems for kids. It's very stressful, and it's exhausting for kids who are trying to make sense of the world that looks double to them.
Yeah.
So based on that, we went back for a subsequent follow-up evaluation, which was much more in-depth, and we learned that she had some other visual deficits as well. One was focus accommodation, meaning she couldn't clearly or rather efficiently transition from near to far focus back and forth, from, say, the board to up close. And she had a visual motor integration deficit, and that specifically explained the writing deficit that caused her to be 2 grade levels below where she was. So we had our answer.
Okay.
And this...
Can I just interrupt you because I have a question? So I actually have 2 questions. So why wasn't this picked up in a regular vision test?
Okay. It's a great question, and it's a big question.
Okay.
So there are several prongs to my answer to that. One is the typical, let's go with the typical vision screening that occurs in schools. Right. Even the term vision test. Vision, again, we conflate that with eyesight. And test, is it an exam? Is it an evaluation? Right. Very vague. So let's start with the typical screenings that happen in pediatricians' offices and schools, with the Snellen eye chart, which is that big eye chart you see on the wall with the big E on the top. So the Snellen eye chart tests for, or shows us, how well somebody sees at a distance of 20 feet, period. Okay. That's where you get that 20/20 reading.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell us anything more than a 20-foot distance. Now, It doesn't tell us 30 feet, it doesn't tell us 10 feet, 5 feet, or within arm's length, where a lot of learning takes place when
Right.
kids are reading and writing.
Mhm.
And it only detects 5% of vision problems in children. This test, this evaluation method was developed in 1862. And it is still the go-to method that we are using to screen for children's vision.
Wow.
Despite everything we have since learned about children's vision, a whole subspecialty of optometry grew out of this in the early 1900s, developmental optometry. And with everything we now know vision is, this is still what we're using. It is beyond outdated. And so a lot of kids have problems that are not being picked up with this screening, if that's all they're getting. Now, if they're being brought by their parents to an optometrist or an ophthalmologist privately for an examination, like you would go to the dentist, believe it or not all kids are. And so they might find more there in that kind of evaluation. But a comprehensive eye exam, which tests for the roughly 24 vision skills that we use every day that we don't even know we use or have, or are part of our sensory system, are not always evaluated in an eye exam. It depends on what the doctor does. And there's a difference between optometry and ophthalmology. Ophthalmology is more medical focused, but they do test for vision. Optometrists, while they're not medical doctors and don't do surgery and things like that, they still do look for medical conditions. So there's overlap, but there's still, somewhat of a difference between the two fields.
Yeah.
And so depending on what the exam looks for, that's going to determine the outcome of what they find. Now, a comprehensive vision exam, as I started to mention, is going to look at all of those skills that are required, the children need in order to learn. And that comprehensive exam should become the new gold standard, because obviously the Snellen chart is not covering what we need. And it's hit or miss as to what a child will experience in a doctor's office. A developmental optometrist will absolutely do a comprehensive exam and look for those skills, because they're all about the functional aspect of vision, not the medical. They are, but they do incorporate, they treat to some extent the medical piece too. But they cover the functional piece much more than even a regular optometrist. Not all of them, but some of them do. And I say this with caution because there's a spectrum out there of what different doctors cover. And so an optometrist who is not a developmental optometrist, but is aware of the importance of these functional skills in a child's learning experience will maybe bring them on board in their practice to look for. It just depends on the doctor. And I say that with all respect to how different people practice. So the answer to your question is it varies. It's not something standard. Like the Snellen eye chart is a standard protocol that is done in schools, even though it's very, very outdated and it's telling us so little. What we need to do is really create a standard that is going to look for all of those skills, that the functional aspects of vision, and how they affect learning, because that will tell us much more about a child's readiness for school. And if they are struggling, and if it's rooted in a vision problem, that could be detected and hopefully addressed.
Okay.
So
I'm curious. So just a snippet of my own life. I found out my daughter was blind in one eye when she was like 5 years old. And I was like, how did we miss this? So I feel your pain when all of a sudden you realize, like, what could I have done? What did I do? Like it was, so I was just curious. So going back to your daughter's story,
I empathize.
Finding out that she had this, is it a muscle, is it really a muscle control?
It was in part
undefined. Yeah. Okay. Undeveloped.
So some of these vision problems are rooted in ocular muscle weakness.
Okay.
Insufficiency is. So she went through, once we found out these deficits, she went through a course of something called vision therapy.
Okay.
Therapy, like speech therapy or occupational therapy or physical therapy, is a regimen that retrains the eyes and the brain to function correctly.
Okay.
And she went through 9 months of this, and it strengthened her ocular muscles, which were weak.
Yep.
And a whole menu of different things that she did through her sense of vision, but also through her vestibular sense and even her auditory sense, because it's all integrated
Yes.
to get her where she needed to be. So she went through that, and it was this unbelievable experience. She graduated from vision therapy where she needed to be,
Okay.
everything what it should be. She was, not surprisingly, subsequently declassified, and she went on to thrive in
Fabulous.
by 4th grade. She was through this process, and she went on to thrive. And I mean, she graduated from high school, National Honor Society, honors student,
Oh, how wonderful.
college with honors. I mean, like, you know, this, I cannot imagine her today if we did not stumble onto this.
Yes, right.
And
and find someone that knew how to fix that particular thing. Because I think there
correct.
are specialties, but you can't always find them.
That's correct. And I want to mention, I'm trying to figure out which direction to go in here. I'm going to just quickly say, as an aside, my son went through this too, also.
Okay.
Because now I knew about this, right, through my daughter, and said, okay, we know what kind of exam we need to get for Jonah, and he's got a, we want to make sure everything is what it should be, and we did that in 3rd grade, and thankfully everything was, and he was chugging along just fine until middle school, and things changed in 6th grade, and it's a long story. It's in the book, actually, I think. It's so long since I looked at it, I have to tell you. Funny thing about it, this is the thing. When I wrote the book, I could only write it in 1st person in the preface. Everything else had to be 3rd person. So I told my daughter's story is the preface of the book.
Gotcha.
My son's story I had to talk about in 3rd person, which was very awkward. Those were the publisher's rules, which is why for me it's a little vague, because I know I talk about it, but I'm like, okay, now where did I talk about it with his experience? So forgive me, because it was very hard to write about this personal experience in 3rd person. But anyway, he had a concussion in gym class. He was knocked over playing in a game, and it induced vision problems in him. In fact, he had the very same issues that my daughter had as a result of the concussion. So while these problems can be developmental in nature, or genetic even, they can also be induced. And so because vision is wired throughout 80% of our brain and is responsible for 80% of the learning that comes in about the world, when you get a serious bump on the head, it is very easy to jostle that wiring and to create problems. So this, again, needs to be common knowledge for school nurses, pediatricians, doctors, parents, teachers, because if a child has suffered a concussion and then they are seeing, and they may not even realize that these symptoms are vision related, because some of these concussion symptoms are so insidious they can look like other things, like, oh, they're just tired, or they're this. But we need to know that it could cause a vision problem, and if it does, then vision therapy is then needed to fix that. And so he went through 4 months of vision therapy and was back where he needed to be after that as well. And thankfully I knew about this, or we never would have known, and that would have stayed with him. So this is another whole facet to concussions that is its own discussion.
Right. It's such an epidemic today. Excuse me. They're talking, in child sports and stuff.
Right, because sports are so organized now, and kids they're competing at younger and younger ages, and it's right. So concussions are epidemic, and it's interesting because I use the word epidemic for these vision problems that kids are struggling with, because whether it's because of a concussion or not, vision-related learning problems affect 1 in 4 children. 1 in 4 children. I mean, that's a staggering statistic.
Wow. And where does that statistic come from?
So this is, sorry?
like who's studying it that statistic was out there?
Oh, this was put out by the American Public Health Association years ago.
Okay.
And it's interesting, and there are some statistics in the book about when you break it down and look at the percentage of kids who are having learning problems in school, and then the percentage of those problems that are based in reading, and then and there were studies done to show those reading problems, the percentage of the reading problems that are actually based in a vision problem. And so we can connect the dots and see, how this happens. And I mean, you can even as a teacher, and we all know this probably because just from when we were in school even, and then maybe as parents, when you have the spectrum of learning ability in a classroom, right, there's always like, I wouldn't say always, but you've always got that group of kids that are sort of struggling. And
Yeah.
to me, when I think back to my years in the classroom, that's a rough percentage that kind of matches that statistic.
Yeah.
So in any case, so I wanted to mention that because it's very important, but I know that there were two tangents I could have gone on with your question, which if you could repeat would help me remind where I wanted to go with the other facet of it.
I have no idea what the question
You asked about how we knew about this, and
well, I asked if it was muscle,
right.
but and then you
Oh,
about the therapy.
Yeah, I
told
remember
us about your son that also. Okay.
I remember what you were asking. You were saying how do people learn about this unless you know this, or unless you choose the right specialist who knows about this.
Yeah.
How do you know? And that's such an important question, because that's why I wrote the book. We were just,
that was my next question, so that works out. Why this book? Why this subject?
it's all in this segue because it connects. We were just lucky with the psychologist we chose to get the second opinion. She happened to know about vision-related learning problems and the whole field of developmental optometry, and she had this in her toolkit, and she was able to look at these evaluation results and say, yeah, this could be this. And so she knew about it. I didn't know this until years later that was atypical. We were just lucky.
Wow.
And once we got through the vision therapy process and Sarah was where she needed to be, I certainly saw how it changed her life. I mean, it profoundly. I mean, I can't even express how much it changed her life.
And in a short time.
Yes.
A short time. Like if you didn't know, it would have kept going and going, and that would have had complications on top of complications. Compounded is what the word I was looking for.
Right. I can't even imagine. And yet I can, because I know there are so many kids out there who are going through this and it's not being picked up. And so to give you an example, well, let me finish my thought about the specialist. So I started doing independent research about this because I was like, wait, like as a teacher, why didn't I know about this? And I could think about kids in my class who I probably had this going on. I just didn't know it.
Yeah.
It was life-changing for me because I said 1 in 4 kids, oh my gosh. And we were just lucky. But I really felt, and believe in my core that it should not come down to luck for children to get the help that they need.
Right.
And so that set me on a whole different path, and it changed the course, the whole course of my career, and led to me writing this book because I wanted there to be a book out there that explains this in plain terms. And that's really what it is. It might sound like a very clinical subject, or it might look textbooky. But I wrote it for everybody. You don't have to be a teacher or a therapist to understand it. It's in plain language because it's just, the purpose of the book is to get this knowledge out there, because we have to create some paradigm shifts to address that. And so to give you an example of how this plays out, 15 of the 18 symptoms of ADHD also occur with a vision-related learning problem, or I should say just a vision problem. That
Wow.
could be a vision-related learning problem. And 13 of the 17 symptoms of dyslexia are also present with the vision, can also be present with a vision problem. So unless you know this, you can see how easy it is to misdiagnose a child. And there are a lot of kids out there, and my daughter was one of them, who are classified as a result, or are medicated, or both.
Mhm.
And it's actually a vision problem that's been missed. And that's tragic because, you know, a classification and a label, I mean, that stays with a child for life. It alters the course of their life. And so, you know, in terms of how or why it is so important that this knowledge become mainstream, I can't emphasize that enough. I'll also mention that 75% of juvenile delinquents have this going on, and roughly the same percentage of prisoners and illiterate adults. So what happens to a child who is struggling in school and labeled or even classified or medicated or whatever, and the root cause of their struggle has gone undetected, and no matter what we're doing, it's not helping this child. And that's the thing about vision-related learning problems. They could also be that a child also has ADHD with a vision problem, or dyslexia and a vision problem, or sometimes it is just dyslexia, not just, but dyslexia and not vision, or it's ADHD and not vision. But if the vision piece is a part of their story, treating it is so important and so influential in their remediation and their outcome, that to let it go untreated will limit the effectiveness of all the other therapies that are being brought into the picture to help that child. So
if I'm a parent and I'm listening to this broadcast right now and I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, you know, I have a high schooler or middle schooler, it could be young, doesn't matter. And they've been diagnosed with ADHD and it just didn't seem right to me, or they've been diagnosed with dyslexia, but you know, whatever that seems like, what would be their first course of action?
Well, I mean, what's that?
Who would check them out? Where do you bring them?
So I always recommend looking at the vision piece, you know, because it's so hidden, and it's hard.
It's an eye doctor. So who is it? Is it an because you had mentioned a couple different ones. So I just wanted to be clear. Is it an ophthalmologist, someone who specializes in vision therapy? Are there vision therapists that aren't doctors? How does that work?
Vision therapists work with doctors. You work alongside them in their practice. You won't find a practice of only vision therapists, because the therapy needs to be overseen by a doctor.
Okay.
So if a parent has these concerns about a child who has a diagnosis and they're not seeing results or whatever, they want to explore this further, then I would suggest going to a developmental optometrist. And I'll tell you that sometimes they're also called behavioral optometrists. The terms are interchangeable. It just, over the course of the evolution of the subspecialty of this field, these two terms were brought into the mix. So behavioral optometry, developmental optometry, really the same thing.
Okay.
I'll share just a little bit of background about why this specific type of doctor is the doctor to see for a problem that's affecting a child's school performance or behavior even. Developmental optometrists or behavioral optometrists have gone through the specific postdoc training and fellowship experience that you need in order to be qualified to look for this in the most thorough way possible.
Okay.
So it's just not something that ophthalmologists typically do. But I'm going to say that again, it depends on the ophthalmologist, because there are some who are aware of this, and in their practice, they may bring it into their practice protocol. So I can't say that as a blanket statement, because it obviously depends on the individual. But but if you want for sure a doctor who is going to have these qualifications, then I would suggest the developmental optometry route.
Okay.
And yeah, and so on my website, which I'll share with you probably later, I guess maybe
you can say it now. You can say
there
it
are
once.
what?
You can say it more than once.
So it's very simple. It's wendybethrosen.com, and there are links to organizations that will take you to sites. One of them is COVD, which is the College of Optometrists in Vision Development, and that's the organization that oversees both the education and training and fellowship experiences for optometrists who want to become developmental optometrists. And on that site, you can find by geography doctors who are qualified in this area.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, and that link's on my website if you didn't catch it now. So.
Yes, and when we do the show notes, we'll actually put that in our description in the show notes. So if anyone's watching this on replay, you can just go down to our show notes and get that information in case they missed.
Okay, great.
Excellent. Anything else that I didn't ask you or you wanted to share about this story before we end the interview?
There's so much. There's so much I want to share, and I know we have limited time. I would say that forgive me, it's really hard to
It's okay.
pick one or two because there's so many. I feel that I wrote this book because I wanted to get this information out there, because there are so many kids who need this help who are not getting it.
Yeah.
Or we're not going to stumble onto the right person like we did, whose families are not going to, it's hit or miss, and it shouldn't be hit or miss.
Yeah.
And it was just so life-changing that I couldn't not get this information out there. But I'll share with you that it's been very challenging to create the wave of change that I'm hoping we can and that we need to do, because
what would you like to see if you could create that wave? Is it to get screenings in school? Is it just to educate educators that they would be able to recognize it? What does that look like for you?
Yes, in fact, that's something I'm working on as we speak
Okay.
to do. So I actually am going to be teaching. I wrote a curriculum for a master's degree that is tailored. It's written for higher education. Because for me, that was the next step. Like, we need to educate teachers about this upstream and downstream. Upstream meaning those teachers coming into the field need to have this in their toolkits. They need to know how functional vision affects learning and what happens when it's dysfunctional and how that can affect a child. And I'm going to be teaching a course about this starting next year, which I'm thrilled about. And then I'm also working on a professional development module with a developmental optometrist to offer to teachers to bring into their school systems on sort of a widespread basis in a virtual workshop fashion. Obviously, we can't be everywhere, so this is something that they can bring into their schools and use to train their teachers in this. And so that's the downstream piece. We need policy change. We need to have comprehensive vision exams become the new universal standard for children entering school and then yearly, so that we can catch these deficits before they begin to spiral downward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so,
or if they can't afford that, to just have it somewhere in the process. If children are starting to be classified or diagnosed, or if a child study team needs to be brought in at all, have it part of that process.
that's correct. And I'll tell you that there's a resource, and this is the doctor I'm working with. She created a resource, and I'll share that book with you. It's called Eyes on Track. It's by Dr. Christy Remick. And she created this resource for teachers and parents to be used in schools. It's very user-friendly, and I know the first thing as a teacher, and I empathize, the first thing teachers think is like, not one more thing, I can't do one more. I absolutely have no time for one more thing. It's designed with that in mind, to both in a very beautifully tailored, user-friendly way to educate teachers and parents and child study teams, everybody, about this, but that it provides very user-friendly materials that can be used in the classroom to actually screen for issues that kids might be having that would normally not be picked up, and even treat them right in the classroom. Now, I'm going to say the word screening again with intention, because screening is different than a diagnosis.
Right.
A developmental optometrist can diagnose these problems, but a teacher can screen for symptoms or come up with criteria that would indicate the likelihood and the degree of their presence. And these are sensory activities that they're just good for all of us, but they target specific deficits that the kids might be exhibiting and can help shore them up right in the classroom. And these kids will be getting help in ways that they normally may not, because of whatever the reason. And it's designed in a way that it can even incorporate parents, bring parents on board to create these sort of vision coaching situations where we can help kids. And it's a beautiful model. And so that's something that is available. But again, this is not common knowledge. And so, gosh, I mean, for me, it's been a challenge to just get this out into the world as much as it needs to be out there, so that we can start implementing these changes. And again, it's going to take our human village. It's going to take not just doctors and teachers and invested parents. Hopefully all parents are able to be that invested. But we know sometimes they're not, and it's to no fault of theirs. This is a very difficult world to live in, with so many demands, which is why, having this village approach is so important, because it's going to help kids get this support in other contexts like schools. But it's going to take lawyers and policymakers as well to understand the importance of this, and how not only life-changing this is for individual kids, but how world-changing this is. I mean, again, when you think about the percentage of juvenile delinquents dealing with this, and there's a whole chapter devoted to this in the book, it's that important. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This has been thoroughly researched, and we can just step into this if we just know about it, which is the goal. But for those kids who no matter what has been brought into the mix to help them with their struggles that hasn't worked, we know what happens. They give up on themselves and they wind up going down the wrong path. So the societal ramifications of this knowledge, enormous, just enormous. So when I say world changing, I really mean world changing. I mean, this is, it's like we've been operating without a user's manual for our most dominant sense of vision, which we rely on the most, yet understand the least. And there is so much that hinges on that. And when we create a world and an educational system and learning environments for children without that knowledge, and that have expectations that are skewed because they're expecting children to do things they're not developmentally ready to, it's causing all kinds of problems. And to illustrate that point, I'll give you a quick jarring fact. And I hope, I feel like this is a good motivator for people to want to like take this knowledge and tell everybody they know about this, or everybody whose life or work affects that of a child. Take this with you. Children are not biologically ready to read before age 7. The eye muscles that are responsible for our ability to sustain our focus up close are immature prior to this age, and that is normal. It's part of our developmental blueprint. And the brain maturation and motor coordination that is also needed to sync so that it enables a child to focus up close to be able to read also doesn't happen till around age 7 or 8. But the Common Core requires that our children read in kindergarten. So we are expecting 5- and 6-year-olds to do something they are not physiologically built or ready to do. And this is knowledge we're going without and creating, this whole system that we live by. And I mean, you can connect the dots now and see why this knowledge is so important. And I can talk about this in my sleep. I mean, this is obviously something I've become very passionate about. I lost your audio.
Sorry.
Oh, there you are.
Sorry. I put myself on mute because there was background noise.
Oh, okay.
This has been very, very enlightening. I'm so glad.
We like to say eye-opening, but sorry.
Eye-opening, yeah. Woo!
The puns are everywhere.
Yeah.
Sorry, but and I don't even say them. People say to me, "Oh my gosh, this was visionary. This was eye-opening. Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "No, go with it. This is."
Yeah.
We have a little.
So if anyone is listening to this on replay, whenever you're hearing this, please share it. Share it with the teachers you know. Share it with parents you know. Share it with anybody you think that this could help, because I think this is such important information that just isn't out there. We're just not aware of.
Right. You can have it. You can share it at PTA meetings. You can share it at school board meetings. And again, why this information this often comes up. Well, if this is such why for kids, why don't we know about this? Why isn't that's also another entire chapter, because it's and I know we probably don't have time for that, but why this information isn't more common knowledge is but it needs to be, and it can be, and it's just taken a really long time. So we're hoping to move that along, because we can't, I only hope our challenges in the educational system have bottomed out. I hope that we can only go up.
All right, that's a big hope. But
because we've been challenged for a long, long time, and I just feel and this is so a part of that.
Yeah, I agree.
This affects the achievement gap and high school dropout rates, and explains why so many kids who are even who are classified and are getting remedial help or have IEPs or even medicated, why they are still struggling.
Yeah.
It's this, and it's been missed.
Yeah, groundbreaking. Thank you again for being a part of this.
Thank you so much, Camille, for the opportunity.
Yeah, I loved it. Just once again, Wendy's book is The Hidden Link Between Vision and Learning, and Why Millions of Learning Disabled Children are Misdiagnosed. Again, share this with everyone you know. If you'd like to get the book, you can actually go on our own website, thenaturallife.org, and look in our bookstore. It's under our members books section. You can find Wendy's book pretty easily. Thank you, Wendy, for being here.
Thank you so much, Camille.
So appreciate your time today.
Really appreciate it too. It was great to see you, and thank you everybody for listening. And just want to say this is going to be a team effort, and I am always looking to add people to this team. So if you want to do more to help educate the world about this, please contact me, because this is, again, it's going to take all of us. It's not just a one-woman show.
Again, her website is wendybethrosen.com. Thank you.
Thank you.